Hello and welcome back to another episode of my space exploration speedrun. In this episode we'll be fetching the free ship that you get with the space exploration mod and using the resources on that ship to boost up the space science production. After, we'll be expanding the base and upgrading it with assembly machines and modules, and then we'll be packing all of our resources into a ship to build the Vulcanite and Iridium planet. Just here I'm just checking what resources I want to bring to space, so that I can increase the production up there. I'm just checking all of the resources that I already have sent, and I'm making sure that I have all of the resources to craft the space science labs. So here I'm just running around grabbing a few intermediates so that I can craft the items that I want, and it turns out that I had a non-multiple of 10 number of labs. So each space science lab takes 10 of the vanilla electric labs. Here I'm also grabbing some meteor defense installations and expanding it from the 2 that we have normally, because as time goes on, the scenario ends up sending more and more meteors to attack the base. Here I check what are the requirements for the speed module 3, and it turns out you can use regular space science, but at the moment, because it's so slow, I'm just keeping it on the current science. There I just unpacked the rocket for the items that were going to go to the Vulcanite planet and put it in the warehouse temporarily on the left. So here I'm checking the cargo rocket production, and I'm trying to boost it because we're limited on red circuits. The rocket control units are a bit behind compared to what rocket parts I want. We're still a bit behind, and then I figured that the plastic production is a bit low, so I go around and upgrade all the modules on the refineries. Here I also realized that 1/4 of this plastic production was missing a belt, so the 2 saturated lines weren't actually being filled. Here I'm flying around and I'm holding Z to put 1 speed module into each assembler, because it's the optimal ratio of speeds to production at this level of technology. So eventually we'll be replacing the speed modules inside the assembler with beacons, which offers a better level of productivity and also a better level of speed. So here I'm finally just mass producing the tier 4 assemblers so that I can upgrade as much of the base as I possibly can. This is just so that I can start getting the rocket parts as quickly as possible. Here I'm upgrading even more of the red circuits because it's what's limiting the rocket control units. I also increase the amount of copper that I'm sending up to the control units. Here I noticed that one of the smelter columns was missing a line of copper ore input, so I add that back in. And I'm progressively upgrading the red circuit production. There I increase the limit on the productivity modules so that I have a larger buffer. And I also max out the productivity on the blue circuit production. Here I realized that the mall is very limited on steel, while the steel for the rocket production is actually backed up, so I decided to run an extra line to send some of the rocket production steel back to the mall. I was going to try and run it along the top section of the base, but it turns out I didn't have enough space, so I ran the steel down below the smelters. This is what happens when you have a base that isn't fully designed for everything. You end up with a little bit of spaghetti mixed in. Here I'm adding extra productivity modules to both the rocket control units and also the rocket cargo parts. There I finally placed the belt to fix the 1/4 of the plastic machines not running. Here I decided to remove the modules out of the top section of the build since they're not running. I also decided to add some productivity modules to all of the builds that consume a lot of resources. Here I finally set up the express belt production in preparation for the Vulcanite planet. So I'm routing in a little bit of lube. And then I'll be routing in the gears that I buffered. I upgrade it from yellow belt to red belt, which doubles the throughput. Now I'm going to route in a little bit of red circuits for the splitters. Here I add productivity modules since the amount of machines running on the red circuit assemblers increased. That's probably because of the excess plastic that we added in. So here I'm deciding if I want to upgrade all of the belts to red, but I decide that it's not a decent idea because the machines don't actually produce more than the number of belts that are already there. Here I'm checking on our lube production because we actually start running out since we turned on the express belt production. So here I actually decide to reconnect the second half of the lube production because when I placed down the second copy I didn't connect the lube. So here I'm checking on all of my different products, making sure that I have everything running. Earlier I disconnected the nuclear production because it was consuming all of my steel to supply the steel further up the line, but now that the line is producing less of those items that I need, I'm changing it back to the nuclear. Here I'm actually increasing the amount of productivity modules that I use on this machine, and then I'm also boosting its production overall. So this warehouse will consume a whole bunch of materials and then it will produce a ton of the uranium capsules that I can bring them to other planets to power the base. The benefit of productivitying the red circuit production is that the red circuits are directly using the modules, so I'm using the modules to produce more modules. There I'm checking the recipe on the iron ingot production, and by the end of the episode I will have set up a iron ingot manufacturer, or at least blueprinted it. So here I'm going to the free ship that you get. I don't really bother cleaning up the wreck because the only thing that you get from it is scrap. And scrap recycles into all of the different ores. Iron, copper, stone. I think that's it. So here I use the resources that you get on the ship to fix it. It was missing a solar panel and it was also missing an engine. While I'm flying, I actually realized that the ship doesn't have enough power if you don't have the energy weapon upgrade, because the meteors actually have health, so the higher your energy weapon upgrades are, the less energy it takes for a laser to destroy a meteor. Because of this, I actually have to slow down the ship so that the ship doesn't crash. In the console, you can manually set the target speed, so otherwise it'll go to the max speed, Before it was trying to reach 100 speed, but now I've limited it to 50 and I have to go even lower in order to reduce the damage that the ship's taking. Here I'm just taking inventory of what's on the ship while the accumulators build up energy. So I started with 50 and now my target speed is 30. Hopefully this will be stable. I try to start doing the energy weapon damage research, but then I realized that I have no military science because I didn't build it into the base. Here I check whether or not the steel requester is working. It turns out that either if the ground station or the satellite station is low on power, the signal doesn't travel through properly. So what's happening is that my ground station doesn't have enough power, which means that it's not receiving the signals. You'll see here that I'm actually very confused. I'm wondering why the wire system isn't working. But, thankfully, the problem fixes itself, because as the rocket isn't consuming resources anymore, the base is backing up, which means that it's using less and less power. I decided to not bother with research at the moment because it's more important for me to upgrade this base. So the first action of business is to craft all of those labs that I brought up with me into the space labs. So I set the requester to bring the extra ingredients to the chest, and then I start turning all of the labs that I brought into them. In the ship, you get a free space manufactory and also a free beacon. With this beacon, I'm going to try and use the effect on 6 of the space labs, which will give me a big speed boost in my science research. So here, I try and figure out a way to do direct insertion, but it turns out that if I did it this way, I'd only get at most 4 labs within the range. Since I started suffocating, I only had 2 of the life support capsules. I decided to quickly focus on the life cycle recycling system. I don't know why, but it seems that this blueprint had a mistake. The washing of the capsule is meant to take in water, but for some reason I'm supplying it with cosmic water, which is obviously incorrect. Also, because of the way that Factorio fluids work, if you have the cosmic water connected to an output, it doesn't matter whether or not it's the correct one, it will assume that it's connected to the same fluid box. So even if I connected water to that pipe, and the cosmic water was rotated to be on the same fluid box, it would actually conflict, because the Factorio devs added a feature such that you can't connect systems with different fluids. So here I finally find that the ground base is actually loading up more steel onto the rocket, which is good. Now I'm going to spend a bit of time trying to figure out the layout for these 6 science labs. Because I can't yet craft the requested chests, they're actually very limited in where I want to use them. But for the purposes of speeding up science, I decided to use 3 of them for these labs. Here I check the blueprint for that mistake with the life support recycling. Here I'm checking which researchers I want to queue up. I'm upgrading the single space assembler to a big space manufactory, which is much faster than the previous one. And now I'm laying out the 6 labs. Now look at that science go. Before we were crawling on, but now we're actually researching at a decent pace. Here I'm deciding what items I want to leave up in space. I check whether or not everything's loading correctly, and then I realize that the space base is actually lacking in power. As I said, if either side is lacking in power, it means that the signals don't get transferred, which would mean that the space base eventually stops running. You'll notice that one of the bots just exploded. That's one of the fun features of space exploration. There's a mod called robot attrition, which means that occasionally, depending on the surface, your robots can explode and drop the item that they were carrying. There, I just loaded up the capsule with all of the rocket parts that I sent off. Whenever you send a rocket to a pad, it has a chance to recover some of the parts that you used to create the rocket. You can actually research to increase the number of parts that you get returned to you. Here I'm checking out all of the different resources that are required to get up to Iridium, because as I've said before, the Vulcanite planet also has Iridium, and the Iridium will be used for the delivery cannon modules. Basically, every resource that I want to send between surfaces will need the Iridium for the delivery cannons. There is a base level delivery cannon pod that doesn't require Iridium, but it's a lot more of a hassle to set up because it would require setting up a whole rocket part build on every planet. There I'm increasing the limits on the module production, and here I'm setting up the rocket pods. The delivery cannon pods. Here I'm setting up the delivery cannon pods, which will be used for sending between planets. I get distracted by the fact that the power is low, and I go fix the nuclear plant. Previously I was using a circuit condition to only insert fuel at a certain point, but once you actually start consuming the amount that the reactor produces, you might as well remove the circuit condition. Here I'm deciding all of the extra items that I want to pack for the Vulcanite planet. So I have enough reactor components for a 1.2 gigawatt reactor. I have a ton of centrifuges for the Vulcanite production. I have enough oil components for an oil build, which will be used for the sulfur because Vulcanite requires a lot of sulfur. I'm also keeping in consideration some of the items that I want to bring for Iridium. So this is some of the base level delivery cannon pods. As I mentioned, eventually we'll be using only the Iridium based ones. Here I'm increasing the productivity on the rocket science, considering it uses the most resources. There I just connected up the second rocket silo, so that will be actually used for the science. And here I'm deciding where I want to place the iron ingot production. The iron ingots are a required component of the production science, which is the next one with vulcanite. Here I'm upgrading all of the rocket parts to the tier 4 assemblers, and then I'm putting modules in all of them. I'm practically using all of my modules before I head off to the other planet. Here I grab some logistics bots and construction bots for the Vulcanite Planets network. Here I grab a ton of the express belts, and then I also decide to increase the limit on the chests. Here I'm checking how many belts the builds actually need, and then I change the chest limits accordingly. Here I'm checking on the uranium fuel cell production, and I go up to the base up here, and then I realize that it's missing sulfuric acid. So checking on this column, I realize that only half of the battery sulfur has been offset, so I decide to connect both sides so that I'm basically turning as much sulfur into sulfuric acid as I can. Yeah, for some reason the water system is completely messed up. So I decide to disconnect the old steam system and then focus on improving the throughput of this water system. Here I use one of the mod features, which is Factorio search or factory search. It basically allows you to search for entities, items, products, all sorts of things. It's very important for the speedrun because you end up with a lot of different items on multiple different planets and you're not sure where you put things. So there I set up the requested chest for the logistics rocket silo so that I can send things by request up into orbit. Here I'm doing a bit of spaghetti in order to get medium poles into this build. In future I'll have a dedicated section for the power poles. Here I'm doing a final check on the items that I require for the Vulcanite build, and I also think about whether or not I want to place down one of the 1.2 gigawatt reactors in the Navi space. So there I grab some of the induction furnaces, which is also required for Vulcanite, and here I'm placing some iron plates down and increasing the production of the uranium cells. When checking on the uranium, I see that it has sufficient sulfuric acid, which is good. Here, just in case I forget anything on the Vulcanite planet, I grab some intermediates that I wouldn't be able to craft very easily. I also decide to pick up even more express belts. I pick up the delivery pods, which we'll be using to send the Vulcanite back. I grab a bit of stone in case I need to craft anything that requires stone. I pick up all of the modules, pick up the cliff explosives. The number of times that I've visited a planet without cliff explosives is ridiculous. And we've landed. I decided this region down in the bottom right to be the best place for the first base. In this speedrun you can turn off biters on navies, but you can't turn them off anywhere else, nor cliffs. Here I decide to place down the reactors first, since I can heat them up while I'm building the rest of the system. Now it's just a case of flying back and forth and organising inventories. Unfortunately, we won't be able to build the base before the end of the episode, but we will be able to finish building the nuclear reactor. Here I try and make sure I do the water system properly. So I feed 2 pump jacks into each line, and I make sure all of the lines are separate in order to ensure throughput. A funny thing I realized though is that I don't have any power to power these pump jacks. I decided to place down the heat pipes first because it acts as a big heat battery for the reactors to just spread the heat out into. A feature that I didn't take into consideration during the launch is that if I bring exactly the right number of items, I'll end up being short, because when launching from cargo rockets and crashing, there's a chance that you lose some of the items that you sent. So I end up missing 1 heat exchanger and 3 turbines. That's why I kept the most important items, the centrifuges and the reactors, on my person, because the person isn't affected by that. And here is my solution to having no power for the water pump jacks. I place down the very first item that we place for power, the burner reactor. So you'll see here I'm missing some of the turbines. And we've almost concluded the episode. In the next episode we'll be setting up the Vulcanite planet, sending some of it back, and hopefully setting up the space base for production science. After that, we may do a revisit of the Vulcanite planet to set up the iridium production and sending it to the other planets. Hope you had a good time, and thank you for watching.